Media outlets called you an election denier, forecasting the race, and dismissed your methods. You were perfect. 56 out of 56 jurisdiction. Was there anything in the final results that surprised you?
The biggest surprise to me, pro-Trump surprise, was Texas. People have been watching these margins go from 15 to 9 to 5.5. And then Trump won it by more than 13 points, almost 14-point victory in Texas. So that is a big feather in the cap for a populist America First model, because it's not going to exist without Texas and its energy production and its base of social conservatism.
All right, guys, happy Wednesday to you. I'm already looking forward to the weekend. I know, that's just where I am. For some people, it's a short week. Not for me. No. We don't take days off here. We keep going. Seth Keshel is coming up. You remember Seth Keshel? Seth Keshel was the guy that we had on multiple times leading up to the election. He nailed it. 312 electoral votes for Trump, and every one of the states, territories, electoral votes, 100% right. A++. And the midterms are already starting. And I know to many of you, you've got like, hey, can't we just rest for a second? But the reason I want you guys to understand this is because we've seen the movie. President Trump needs a Republican House and Senate to pass his agenda, and that's the plus. The negative is this. If he doesn't, they're just going to impeach him and impede him, investigate him, obstruct him. That's what they're going to do. So it's not just why we need the House and Senate to advance the agenda. It's what we need to stop. And here's the thing. History is not in our favor. The House, the party out of power, gains a lot of seats in the House, like on average of 27 seats. The Senate gains an average of 3.1 seats. So just doing the math, you realize that this is not a good headwind to be facing. But I think that if we can get ahead of this, if we can understand it and get ready for it, we can beat it. We've done it before. President Trump did pick up seats in 2018. So just saying, but we're going to have a conversation that you will hear nowhere else about the lay of the land and what is at stake and where. Trust me when I say you don't want to miss this. But the world is all excited about Doge. Last night, a federal judge, a Biden judge, an Obama judge, she's first appointed by Obama, then by Biden, Tanya Chutkan, you might remember that name. She was the one that was going after President Trump. So I say all that because this is not a friend. She dissed all those Democratic attorney generals, Letitia James and others, that filed a lawsuit against President Trump saying that Doge couldn't do what they were doing. They had to stop. I mean, just stop on its face and just remember this. They're telling the president of the United States, the elected head of the executive branch, you can't look into the executive branch. You can't look at these records. It was, and so I'm glad she did it, because at some point, yes, you're a partisan judge, you're a hack, I get it. But the reality is, I don't think anyone should deny that the elected head of the executive can't look at the executive books. That's insane. But the media is still like unbelievably out of their minds. Congressman Tim Burchett from Tennessee, who does a masterful job, went on CNN. I don't know why. Maybe he lost a bet. And he gets into it with the host about waste, fraud, and abuse. Take a look.
Humans will make mistakes, ma'am, but currently these are bloated programs. You have no-show employees that are angry that they're having to go back to work, that they've moved, and they're not. No one's disagreeing. There's bloat and waste. Jobs were.
No one's disagreeing.
Well, then why are y'all not exposing it? Have y'all even talked about? Hey, Mozambique, we sent them $10 million for circumcisions. Okay. I mean, goodness gracious, ma'am, Americans are paying.
We've been covering at length
salaries.
Where the money is going to.
No, you haven't. All y'all do is run down Elon Musk and Donald Trump, and you continuously do this, and that's why your ratings are in the tank, ma'am. All
right, Congressman Tim Burchett, we're going to leave it there. I do appreciate your time coming on and having this conversation. Thank you very much.
Now, keep in mind, folks, just as a reminder here, this is like, this isn't a partisan issue. Why aren't we cheering for people that find waste and abuse? It's good for America. It's not good for one party. It's good for taxpayers, for citizens. President Trump sat on the teleprompter, in front of this, at this press conference and just read off a few of these things. Take a look.
$520 million. Somebody got $520 million for an environmental, sounds like an environmental study. I've always been one that paid a lot of money for my environmental studies, but I paid like $50,000, not $520 million. $520 million for ESG. $25 million to promote biodiversity, conservation, and promote licit livelihoods by developing socially responsible behavior in the country of Colombia. Well, it's nice, $25 million to go into Colombia for something that nobody ever heard of. $40 million to improve the social and economic inclusion of sedentary migrants. $40 million.
Again, cheer for it. Why are we like Democrats in the media so against this? Why? You should be for it, folks. It was unbelievable. So we're going to have a great discussion on this guy. By the way, Governor Rod Blagojevich of Illinois, he's on the show on Friday. He was pardoned by Trump. His sentence was commuted by Trump. He was on The Celebrity Apprentice with Trump. I'm so excited for this conversation. And I'm telling you, the beautiful thing about this platform is you will hear a conversation that you won't hear anywhere else. So it's Friday. I get it. Take a look. Mark that calendar now because you're going to want to see it. Okay. Before I get to Seth Keshel and break down the midterms and the Senate and where we are, and trust me, you guys, we're going to get this in a way that no one else is. I want to tell you about two of our great sponsors. One of them will save your life because I've talked about this before. If you have a fire extinguisher or a first aid kit, then you need one of these. This is a LifeVac, right? You put it over someone's mouth in the event of a choking incident, and it pulls the obstruction out. Anybody can be a hero with a LifeVac. In fact, I've mentioned this if you're a longtime watcher of the show, like a week ago, the folks at LifeVac called me and said, you're not going to believe this because they track this stuff, that someone who bought a LifeVac on your show saved a life. A person today is alive that was having a choking incident because the person had a LifeVac in their home who watches this show and purchased it. They track those orders. That's how they stay as sponsors. Awesome. Now you should be that person. I hope to God you never have to use a LifeVac. If your kids' schools don't have a LifeVac, LifeVac will send them one for free. But don't be caught without one in your home. A life could literally depend on it. So go to lifevac.net. It's lifevac.net. One big thing, LifeVac, lifevac.net. Literally, do not wait another minute. Hit pause if you're watching this on YouTube and go get yourself a LifeVac. All right. Seth Keshel's coming up, a great guy, but there's another great guy that I want to tell you about, my friend Leo Grillo. Leo Grillo is the founder of Delta Rescue. Delta Rescue has been taking in all sorts of animals, dogs, cats, horses, you name it, abused, malnutritioned, abandoned, you name it. Leo Grillo, it all started with one dog that he named Delta, and then that blossomed to become the world's largest no-kill shelter. Sanctuary. I said sheltered, Leo. I'm sorry, Leo. That's what Leo schooled me on the first time that we talked about it. He said, it's not a shelter. We're not looking to place them somewhere. We're looking to take care of them for life. It's a sanctuary. And that they do. For decades, they've been taking care of these animals, all sorts of them. Because they're out near the wildfires in LA, I personally went. Here's the sheet to prove this, folks. I made a donation to Delta Rescue. And I'm asking you to do the same because he doesn't rely on government handouts. Leo Grillo and the folks at Delta Rescue rely on people like me and you that are animal lovers that want to care for animals. Go to deltarescue.org, take a look at the videos, make a personal contribution. If you can, go to the estate planning kit tab. You'll see it up there at the top of their thing and see if you have an old 401k or stocks. Talk to your tax advisor because maybe if you can make Delta Rescue part of your estate, then it can become an enduring mission and go on for decades to come. So go to deltarescue.org and make a contribution. Think about making it part of your estate. Without further ado, I want to bring in the author of Captain K's Substack, former Army captain, military intelligence officer, Afghanistan veteran, and election guru who nailed it last time, Mr. Seth Keshel. Hey, Seth, welcome back to the show. Great to see you.
Good to be back, Sean. Remember the last time we did this, it was a fortuitous thing, given the outcome of the 2024 election.
It was. I remind people, not as probably as much as I should, but we nailed it on the show. 312 electoral votes. You did too. I want to get into this because the difference between me and you is this. I tell all the people all the time, I'm not the smartest guy in the room. I had a lot of smart people on the show like you who informed my decision making, whose basis for their analysis was rooted in data and trends and things like that. All I did was aggregate a bunch of smart people who I know in politics to tell me where things were, but you were one of those people. And I think, I get a kick out of this, and I want to start so people understand where we're headed. Let's talk a little bit about the past, because I think too many times in politics, an election happens and everyone moves on, and we don't look at what went well and what didn't. So I want to start with that. Then I want to get into the midterms, and we'll go to the House and the Senate. So let's start with the past. Leading up to this election, media outlets called you an election denier, forecasting the race, and dismissed your methods. And so I just want to start with this. When the dust settled, you were perfect. 56 out of 56 jurisdictions. And what does that mean? That means, obviously all 50 states, DC, Guam, Puerto Rico, like all of our territories. And 300 electoral votes for Trump, 226 for Harris. I want to start with this. From a personal standpoint, how cool was it when you woke up and said, yep, nailed it?
It was really cool, and of course it took forever to call Arizona because it's a third the size of Florida, but it takes 2 weeks to count the vote. But I knew that Arizona was going to go in the bag. But the 56 races, we're talking about the states plus DC, and then the 5 split electoral votes of Maine and Nebraska. So to look back and get all that right, some of them were tough. Nebraska's 2nd district is a tough call. It's almost a coin flip, and so was New Hampshire. We talked about it right here on the show. I knew that the voter registration file for New Hampshire showed a tight race, even though the polling showed it somewhere off in the stratosphere. So it was cool. And it was vindication in a way, where the New York Times wrote this piece and made me out to look like some end of level boss. And here I am, they're mocking all the polling versus my picks, and it's all correct. Now, presidential elections are easily predictable based on history, but my methodology was based on traditional political analysis, light on polling, but it was also something that included an analysis of the laws that have changed since 2015 that allow for manipulation of election results and therefore push some states that should be competitive into permanent blue state status and make other red states tougher to win.
Was there anything in the final results that surprised you? Something that was closer or a bigger victory than you thought?
Absolutely. President Trump was on an interview last week, and he was discussing the election results. And the interviewer said, she got 75 million votes, talking about the need to have unity in the country. And he kind of shrugged it off. And that's what my analysis picks up too. She only outgained Joe Biden in 6 of 50 states. And they happened to be states that either had very important congressional races or they were critical battleground states for electoral votes. She lagged Biden's totals in New York and California by 15+% in each. And California, of course, is her home state. It suggests to me that a lot of the ballot harvesting and packing was relaxed in some of the reliable red and blue states. And that's where we got the distortion of the numbers from 2020 to 2024. There are a number of Senate races that concern me and some House races as well. This is why we have such a small Republican majority in addition to the redistricting that was forced upon these GOP states by courts, but not in blue states.
What was the delta in some of these places between your model and some of the quote unquote polling?
Most of my picks were within a couple points. Some of them were right on the nose. Some of them were within 1/10 of a point, like in Montana. Some of the states I think that were closer than I expected to be, like New Jersey would be a great example. New Jersey finished within 6 points. Then there were some states that were further off than I thought they would be. Trump was a little bit further off in Virginia than I expected him to be. Minnesota, he was a little bit further off in Minnesota than I expected, which of course is dominated by the Twin Cities. But the biggest surprise to me, pro-Trump surprise, was Texas, where Texas is a state that everybody's been watching. It's got a big suburban college-educated population where people have been watching these margins go from 15 to 9 to 5.5. And then Trump won it by more than 13 points, almost 14-point victory in Texas. So that is a big feather in the cap for a populist America First model because it's not going to exist without Texas and its energy production and its base of social conservatism. So that was the best pro-Trump surprise. There were states that I didn't think he would win, like New Jersey, because of the types of laws that they have in the state that make it difficult for any Republican to win.
Has there been any? So let's just start with this. What made you different when people look and say, "Wow, you nailed it"? Why is your model better than? I mean, aside from being more accurate, but it's almost like, what's the secret sauce that makes what you do better than a lot of the other pundits and analysts?
It's what you would expect from an intelligence officer's mind. Now, of course, you're a military officer as well, and you mentioned that you have access to all these smart people and all these tools in your drawer, and that's exactly the essence of leadership in the military officership, using the people that you have at your disposal, your staff, to get work done. So my model is a bit like an intelligence analyst toolkit. We used to have these wheels we would draw for pattern analysis. We would have data sheets. We'd have spreadsheets. We'd have ability to work data any way possible, maps, of course. So with me, do I ignore polling? Not completely, but I think that polling is a bit of a lost art, like the stolen base or the hit and run. And I think that polling would be a lot better if it was more selective. So if you want to give me an accurate poll of Arizona, why don't you poll Pima County and tell me where the Republican is in Pima County? And if you get him somewhere in the low to mid 40s, you've got a Republican win brewing in the state, rather than these massive polls. And nationwide polls now, especially thanks to the polarization of the electoral college, are extremely worthless. In fact, a month before the election, the mainstream media tried to run a narrative that Harris would lose the popular vote and win the electoral college, which doesn't work, given that the current shift in the national politics is a working class shift favoring the right. So my model will also consider, it may look at some polling down at the smallest level, but voter registration by party, which was very accurate. My numbers that I wrote as a final summary was 86% accurate in determining right or left at the county level. And most of these misses were in massive red counties where it's R plus 88 versus R plus 87. So it's statistical noise. And then I've got historical precedent. A great example of that would be polling of Nevada versus Arizona. So whenever I would see a poll showing Trump likely to win Nevada but lose Arizona, I would automatically discount the poll. Why? Because I have over 100 years of history that tells me that that's not correct, because Arizona's been a state since 1912. And Arizona has never voted Democrat for president while Nevada voted Republican. It has never happened. So I suppose that there is a time in history where this could happen, where Nevada's Republican and Arizona goes blue, but it hasn't happened yet in 112 years of presidential politics. So I'm not going to put my money on it now. So that's one example of how I sort these states out. Or states like Minnesota and Wisconsin. I would have advised President Trump to not even spend a nickel in Minnesota, because it's going to wind up to the left of Wisconsin no matter what, because history suggests that's what always happens. So if you do carry Minnesota, you would have already won Wisconsin anyway. So that means you need to go after Wisconsin, because most people would have had you as the presidential victor with Wisconsin in your quiver. And that's the truth.
So, and just real quick on that case. So if you were up in Minnesota, would you even want to spend time in Wisconsin? I mean, to me, on your analysis, it would be, hey, if you're winning Minnesota, you got Wisconsin, right?
Correct. But the point is, all your assets should go into Wisconsin, because you're not going to somehow win Minnesota but lose Wisconsin. You'll drag Minnesota with you if you win Wisconsin big enough. So
I see. Okay.
And this is how I felt about Virginia. When people were saying we need to go campaign in Virginia, it's like, no, you need to make sure you campaign in Georgia and Pennsylvania and hold all the other states like North Carolina, then you'll win, because the objective is 270 to win.
Right. So what do we learn from voter registration? Meaning, there's a lot of folks that have always said, people who register right off the bat, we don't have any voter reg on them. We don't have any voter history on them. So what do we know now, especially after the last few cycles, about people who are newly registered to vote?
So new voter registration is the biggest indicator of intent to vote. And if you're registering, let's just take you back to 2008. So if you get a voter registration in Philadelphia County, Pennsylvania, from a 23-year-old black woman registering to vote for the first time, then you should probably be lobotomized if you don't have her down for a surefire Barack Obama vote. Okay, that's intent. So, or if you're in a state like, let's use Pennsylvania again, Western Pennsylvania in 2016, and you've never voted, but now you register to vote right before the Republican primary, you're probably out there to support Trump in the working class realignment, but definitely going into the general election, registering Republican, that's a surefire indicator. In some places we have the reverse, like in states like Northern Virginia, you don't have party registration, but you have a lot of former Republican voters that switch sides and now vote for the party that is going to bloat the federal bureaucracy. So the voter registration doesn't pick up a lot of these party shifts, and they change over time. So that's where sometimes you might get a miss. But overall, with a larger sample, 67 counties in Pennsylvania, 67 counties in Florida, they all shifted more Republican in registration, and they all followed more Republican in the vote. In Arizona, it was 15 for 15. In New Hampshire, it was 10 for 10. Now, these other states that I brought up in question for 2024 results, they were far less accurate. Pennsylvania was only 54 out of 67, for instance. But you look at the party registration file, new registrations signal intent and enthusiasm. This is why more states that bring in automatic voter registration distorts the accuracy of these models, because they automatically register voters who may not intend to vote. And of course, the more you flood out mail-in balloting and ballot harvesting, that can change these things too. So I would encourage people to look at the accuracy of the models, which I've parsed these out, and they're extremely accurate. 30 states register voters by party, and they all became more Republican except for one, and that was Colorado. But Colorado actually became more Republican in the vote.
Interesting. So as we look going forward at polling, and we see the head-to-head or issues of public polls in our, in news outlets, why should we be like? How should we just overall be skeptical of them? Are they doing things fundamentally wrong? Is the model flawed? Is it all the above?
Polling is ultimately just a tool, and it's neither good nor bad in its own. It is something that can be manipulated, like we saw with Ann Seltzer's poll of Iowa a couple days before the election. Of course, our friend Newt Gingrich took my estimates of that poll and ripped it apart on Mark Halperin's show. But polling can be manipulated like that, where all the fundamentals in Iowa were 99 counties are all more Republican by registration than they were last time. And by the way, 98 of 99 counties became more Republican in the vote this past year in Iowa. So polling can be manipulated, but ultimately it's a tool. And even good pollsters like Richard Barris or Robert Cahaley over at Trafalgar Group, those guys even have a margin of error of a couple points, maybe 2 or 3 points. That means that you can be wrong 2 points to the left or 2 points to the right and still be right based on the margin of error. And 2% in Pennsylvania is 140,000 votes of margin. So it's what it really should be used for by candidates is for, let's say you're running for governor of Florida and you order a poll of the state of Florida. It should be telling you where you're strong and where you're weak in the state, where you should be allocating funds. So if people use polling as the end all be all of I'm winning or I'm not winning, they're not counting votes. And ultimately it's a count of ballots at the end, where you're getting them from. And whether you're operating one of these models where, and this is a good example from the fight in 2024, is fundamentally, if you're a baseball coach, you don't want to train your hitters to swing with an uppercut because it creates a big hole in the swing. However, a lot of guys have a natural uppercut and they hit a lot of home runs. So naturally, I don't think that early voting and mail-in balloting is a best practice for election security. However, I understand why President Trump encouraged everyone to vote early, because that deprived the media of a needed narrative that Harris is up by this much in this state, she's up by this many ballots in Arizona, and that gives you a narrative to pull off a 2020 again. That was deprived from them, and they did not know how to respond to that. So, but either way, your count of ballots is what matters, not your polling averages. So polling can probably tell you not to compete in Massachusetts Senate race. I think that that's fair. But if you believed in polling wholeheartedly, Trump would never show up in Wisconsin because it's a very hard state to poll. One reason that Richard Barris has put out for Wisconsin is that the vast northern region, which is massively MAGA, is very difficult to physically reach. They don't have landlines. Cell phone service is very sporadic. People don't trust pollsters anyway. People have response bias, especially in the age of Trump, where in the early days, people didn't want to admit they were going to vote for Trump. And even to a total stranger on the line, they would say they were voting for the other guy. So you get errors like that aren't even from polling dishonesty. And then you have the other problem where somebody's actually sponsoring the poll, and they're not cheap. These good polls are at least 10 grand. And you've got people that are sponsoring a poll and would like to show a certain narrative, and that happens too. So I think it's a tool. I think that you can create a picture of turnout based on historical precedent, based on voter registration, and based on any particular issues that might motivate the bases in these counties. And ultimately, 3,143 counties and independent cities in the United States determine our elections.
That's right. In your newsletter, you said something that sort of piqued my interest and made me smile, because you talk about, and this is my segue into the midterms, because you talk about election season as an enduring thing that never really ends. It's kind of like how the NFL season proliferates itself through the calendar in unique ways. So you wrote, regular season runs from the beginning of September to January. Okay, I get that. That's your final push, election day, and then the transition. Playoffs and Super Bowl take place in January and February. Pro Bowl combines and NFL Combine take place in February and March. The NFL draft plays, mini camps, training camps. And then you talk about how that plays out with respect to election, where early voting begins in September, runs through October and November. Election day is November. Election counting and challenges take place in November and election. Election winners seated by the end of January. Candidates begin filing for future races in February. Campaigns begin hiring in the spring. Election season begins. I mean, you're right. It's like a season that never ends.
It's like the NFL season. It's you can go to any Buffalo Wild Wings in America and look up at the TV bank over the bar, and there's NFL coverage right there. And of course, this is a business model. But I remember, I'm only 40, and I remember being a kid, and when baseball season went off after the World Series, it was this darkness until February when people reported to spring training. But now, of course,
catchers report. Right.
With more access to information and more revenue channels, of course, this extends. But there is no sport that is more continuous than the NFL. And the same thing is true with elections. They never end. And of course, the media benefits from this too, because it's the polarization and the headbutting, the constant narratives of, well, Donald Trump had chocolate ice cream tonight. How's that going to affect the midterms?
Right. Okay. So you write in your latest newsletter there, midterm context, you only find one case since World War II in which a political party won the White House in 3 straight elections, Reagan, and then Bush 41. This is because the electorate tires of the same party in power, and enough of it breaks from its normal partisan support to back the nominee of the other party as soon as negative outlooks appear on the horizon. Walk us through, just before we get into specific races and numbers, the sort of historical context that we have to view this upcoming midterm.
So you and I are political people, and we are biased in what we believe. We have that out there on our sleeves. People know what we want, what we stand for, what we'll vote, and what we'll hold our nose for and vote for. So back to use another tired baseball analogy. You always hear from people that love baseball that every team is going to win 60 and they're going to lose 60. And it's what they do with the other 42 games that is typically going to define their season. Now, you have some extremes, like some very bad teams that lose 120, like the White Sox. But for most parts, that's correct. So in a national election, even for the House or the presidency, both sides are going to get 45%, maybe even more than that, maybe 46%. So what that 8% does is going to swing the outlook of the election. So we can talk about any Republican coalitions that have broken away a little bit, like some of these Maricopa suburbanites, or you can look at the Democrat factions that have broken away that they used to rely on. So even Ronald Reagan didn't win the counties of Western Pennsylvania. Everything except Allegheny County now is not only red, but is torch red. So all those people used to be in the Democrat bank of votes, and now they're gone. So there are people in small percentages that break away. So if your Republican nominee for president should have 49% of the vote and probably win the electoral college, and 2% of the people that like Donald Trump and his working class message don't show up for the 2028 nominee, now he's got 47%. And he's probably going to wind up losing. So a small segment of the electorate sways these elections. And that's why you don't have the same party winning presidential elections 3 elections in a row. It was just that Ronald Reagan in the 80s was so strong and got credit for bringing the Cold War to an end, and the economy was strong, that Bush got in there. But most of the states in 88 did blow to the left. Right. And he lost 9 states in 88 that Reagan had won, and several of them were close. Like Illinois breathed its last Republican electoral votes in 88, and so did California by a few points. So if you take those away, then Bush is somewhere in the 300s in the electoral votes. So this is how this works. And the same thing is true with these House seats or these seats that are on the cusp. I'd say you could probably categorize at least 4 different buckets for House seats. You have blue seats that you don't even need to contest. This is the seat that's core urban St. Louis. Then you have red seats that you don't have to worry about, like the Texas Panhandle. And then you have ones that are maybe in a wave year, you got to worry about an upset. And then you probably got the ones that are closest to the core where the Republicans need to defend hardcore. And then the Democrats also need to be watching out for a defender. So probably 6 buckets of votes that I will wind up organizing the House races into.
Okay. So you explain further that even if the president remains popular and is on his way to re-election, like, which obviously this isn't the case with Trump, the base that elected the president is usually passive, whereas the population that supports the opposing party is fired up and all sorts of pissed off and gets out in big numbers. Combine that base energy with the fragments of the electorate who believe divided government is the safest path for controlling partisan fever, you get the ingredients for the party out of power to pick up seats. So, and then you talk about basically since the beginning of the New Deal in 1932, the president's party has lost seats in the U.S. House 20 of 23 times, 87%, which, by the way, 1934, 1988, 2002, I will take a point of personal privilege. In 2002, I ran the incumbent protection division of the National Republican Congressional Committee. That was a point of privilege that we had at that time that we actually bucked the odds. So let's just be blunt here. This does not portend well for President Trump in the House. All right. I mean, we've got a razor thin majority and a lot of seats. So are we just, when we look at your analysis and history, is it just that? And it's, hey, if we work hard and we produce for the American people, we can save ourselves? Or is it, hey, there's really nothing you can do. History is history.
Well, my dad used to tell me that you play the games for a reason. Otherwise, you could just use a computer to simulate everything and you'd have it. So there is political skill that goes into this. There's also circumstance, which if you read Machiavelli's book, he would call that fortune. But obviously, and when I say 20 of 23 times, I am not counting House and Senate results in a presidential year. I'm talking strictly midterm elections. They have their own different dynamics. And this is why, and back on the subject of polling, you have a lot of people that'll talk about this governor's race. Josh Shapiro won Pennsylvania's governor's race by 13 points in 2022. It's not a competitive state. Look, midterms and presidential elections are not predictive of one another.
Well, and also he had a horrible Republican candidate to run against that didn't raise a ton of money. So is that a fair? I mean, candidate quality does matter.
But this is what the people that swear by polling do, is they'll compare apples to oranges, or they'll say, this state is safe because the Republican won by this much. But a great example would be Maine's 2nd congressional district. This is Trump plus 10 up there, and the Democrat won the race. Now, that's one of the most questionable races in my 2024 analysis. However, there's a massive split between their presidential preference and their local political choice, which, again, the House races brings you back to the adage of all politics is local, way more than a presidential election does. So, however, there have been 3 midterms in which the president's party gained seats, and 2 of them are fairly modern, 1998 and 2002. So you play the game for a reason. And that's the biggest thing that I can say is there is definitely a need to contest this. We are somewhat disadvantaged now, whereas the House used to be much more Republican in the previous decade. The census manipulation has cost the Republicans a ton of would-be House seats and electoral votes, which I think that...
So the average loss of House seats since 1934 is 27.
Correct.
We currently have at most a 3-seat majority.
Correct. And now the true majority is 220 to 215 as elected. But that would bring us, if we lost 27 seats, then that would put the Democrats at a 242 to 193 advantage if the net swing, if the GOP lost 27 seats. So that would be a swing of 54 net. But
you were mentioning redistricting and the current lines. Does what I keep harping back on is the fact that the way that the districts have been drawn, there's only 25 real competitive seats anymore anyway.
I would say that, most of the red states have drawn in what is called a vote dump. So Texas has mastered how to contain Austin to just one Democrat-run congressional seat, and probably some of the more uniquely drawn lines that I've seen out there. But the blue states have figured this out as well. The courts cost Alabama and Louisiana 1 Republican seat each in the U.S. House with some very interesting redraws that they said were authorized under racial lines.
Yeah, the Civil Rights Act. It was kind of interesting interpretation there. But so I guess my question is, when you are doing what you do for the midterms on just the House side, are you looking at this purely in a historical way? Or are you going to go district by district 435 different times?
I'm going to go 435 different races. That's the only way to do it. I definitely wouldn't apply any blanket averages to that. However, my assessment is definitely there that the headwind is against the Republican Party just by nature of it being a Republican president midterm.
Right. Oh, I mean, you're right. The history is what the history is. But if Richard Hudson, the chairman of the National Republican Congressional Committee from North Carolina, calls you and says, Seth, we average a loss of 27 seats for the incumbent party. What do I need to tell our members to do to buck that headwind?
Well, the first step is selecting good candidates. And one thing that Republicans specialize in doing is identifying somebody that needs to be primary. The best example from local politics I'll use is Dade Phelan, who is the former Texas House Speaker. He is a Bush acolyte from the old guard. And he was on the ropes in the primaries in 2024, and he did not win a majority in the first round. In fact, because there were three candidates, the guy who beat him in the first round was held just shy of a majority by about a point. And then in the runoff, Phelan's folks went out and recruited Democrats in this open primary and won by an eyelash. And Phelan, of course, won his seat. So Republicans are really good at identifying a guy to beat. And then the local preacher, the local car salesman, the local radio personality, and the local cowboy come out. And they all say that they're the true conservative. And they split the vote 5 different ways. And the incumbent stays in with 36%. So the first thing is being smart and figuring out what kind of candidates need to run. What kind of people need to be kept in. Now, this is one I struggle with. Susan Collins in Maine, Senate. A lot of people have this idea that she's the only Republican that can win statewide in Maine, so therefore the best option. And unfortunately, they are probably correct. Given that
I'm one of those people. I'm from New England. I've seen a bunch of people there. It's not saying that we can't. I just want to be clear on that. I've been up to Maine. I'm with you, but in terms of name ID, raising money, and history of the electorate right now under the current thing, I don't know of another candidate that could run statewide with the money that's needed to keep that seat. Now, hopefully we develop a bench, win that second congressional seat, and build up a bench.
Correct. Now, but the election laws in Maine are the worst in New England.
Oh, my God. Ranked choice voting. Ugh.
And Southern Maine has basically become an exurb of Boston. We're talking about York and Cumberland County especially. So although the rest of the state is extreme, it's like upstate New York. So that's the first step, is selecting good candidates. The second step is to figure out how to get out the vote. And as long as we have this early voting with prolific mail-in balloting, then you're going to have to play the game like was played in 2024. So that's the next step. And also, once this is done, is realistically prioritizing these races and where to spend the money and ensuring that candidates have funding, because funding these races, it's very expensive to run these campaigns effectively. And like I said, all these things are decided in the margins. Some of them we will have races in 2024 that are decided under 1,000 votes, almost certainly, because we do every time.
So you brought up Susan Collins in Maine, Senate race there. That's in cycle. Let's talk about the cycle on the Senate side, because the Senate average for the party in power is a loss of 3.1 seats. Ironically, since 1934, the reason that's ironic is that the House Republicans have a 3-seat majority right now, so that would get us back to a tie. Give us a lay of the land in terms of how many seats are up in the Senate and how many you think are competitive.
Well, we've got the map there, and most of the center of the country is up for grabs. I'd have to sit here and count them on the screen, but you're looking at Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming are safe Republican seats. You could run a brown paper bag with an R next to it in those states and win. And then you have South Dakota, Nebraska. Nebraska had an independent candidate people were worried about, and the Republicans still won big in Nebraska. Then you have Kansas and Oklahoma. Now, Kansas does weird stuff in its midterms and plays Democrat ball sometimes, but I don't think we're going to lose an incumbent Republican seat in Kansas. Texas, you have John Cornyn, who is the non-offensive business variety of Republican who will win the suburban vote just fine. That's not going to be an upset.
You think he's running for re-election? You think Cornyn's running for re-election?
Already announced. And, unless unless he were to back out. But Texas, of course, got blown out to the sea as far as a MAGA stronghold now, and I think that Democrats might be very hesitant to pour a lot of money in there, but they will probably beat the drums about the latest and greatest candidate. Arkansas and Louisiana have seats up for grabs; those are going to stay red. Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, of course. You've got the races that are coming up here in the Southeast are a little bit more competitive. South Carolina is going to be fine. Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Ohio should be fine. North Carolina has Tom Tillis up. Now, Tom Tillis, I think, would win his general election. North Carolina's got a very finicky suburban electorate that continues to grow in Raleigh and in Mecklenburg County. So the risk in North Carolina is another bad primary choice. And I am one of these folks who will talk about election manipulation all day, but Mark Robinson lost by 13 points to Josh Stein in the North Carolina governor's race in a year where Donald Trump was on the ticket. So I think that it is very important for North Carolina statewide GOP to get it together and pick a good candidate who has the right principles and is also electable and smart politically and knows how to handle the media. So I think that Tillis is a safe bet to be reelected. But I also think that you got to do your jobs in the primaries and figure out what that's going to look like. I think that this will force Tillis to become MAGA here in the next 2 years.
Yeah. I think he has seen the light, and that's probably why he voted for Pete Hegseth and et cetera, because he wants to run one more time, and he will put his MAGA jersey on for as long as he has to. I don't do this, but so I think let's just go red then blue. But red, I think competitive wise, you note this in your newsletter, North Carolina and Maine. I agree with your analysis if you think that I'm summing this up correctly, that North Carolina, Tillis stays the nominee. He gets to the primary and then wins statewide. He's got longevity. And I do think that Susan Collins showed the last time that she was up for re-election that she's got the relationship with the voters there in Maine, knows how to raise enough money that she stays.
Yeah, I think that Maine actually continues on its Republican voter registration progression, believe it or not. So that's going to help her a bit. But the good news about the Senate map, and of course the other seats I didn't mention, Iowa and Alaska are also up, and they should stay fine. So given that these Republican seats, all but two of them, in my opinion, are solid, I would put money on them today to be held by Republicans. The only two that look iffy are North Carolina and Maine. Right. That will allow Trump to concentrate his influence on those states for the Senate.
Okay, so then let's finish that out. So the other states that we haven't mentioned that are called in cycle, of the 35 Senate seats that are up this time, we've come through every one of them except for these: Georgia, New Jersey, Virginia, New Hampshire. These are the ones that you write in your latest newsletter are the ones most worth targeting. You write this: right now, it appears the most likely outcome is that Trump will enter the second half of his term with 52 to 55 Senate seats. Okay, those are the states that I want to concentrate in the time that we have left: Georgia, New Jersey, Virginia, New Hampshire. Just start by this without commentary. Rank them from most likely to least likely. So they're all held by Democrats right now. Which do you think is the safest Democratic seat to stay in their hands, and which is the most likely to flip?
I think that the safest seat they have is New Hampshire out of those four.
You don't think New Jersey?
No, it's a very close, it could be a coin flip there, but New Jersey has a very nice working class Republican shift. They also had a very close governor's race in 2021. So I think that Jersey is the one that is on the biggest progression. Jersey also has a massive Latino and Asian population that had a hardcore Trump shift in 2024. Now, New Hampshire was much better off for Trump than it was in 20. But
don't you think if Shaheen doesn't retire, if she retires, that makes it a heck of a lot more competitive, right?
For sure. And then of course having the right candidate. So and this is back on the Collins note, right? So if Chris Sununu runs, then you might have a seat that you go. And then you have the same thing going on in Virginia, for instance. I think that it's very likely that Glenn Youngkin will run for that Senate seat, given that his term is almost up as governor, is limited to a single term as Virginia's governor. So Youngkin is probably the most electable Republican in Virginia for statewide politics, as proven by his election to governor.
That would be one heck of a race, I'll tell you that. And I think he ends up winning that.
Well, if it continues, we've got a long time between now and midterms.
Yeah. But then Georgia, to me, I mean, so it sounds like you and I are by the way, I failed to mention, because in your column you do write this, that, and we don't have time to go down the rabbit hole, but it's interesting. Both Minnesota and Michigan, the Democrat incumbent is not running. I think that's, I wish we had time to get into that, but I think those stay in Dem hands, although worth keeping an eye on. But it sounds like from the analysis that you and I agree that Georgia is the most likely to flip.
I think that Georgia is going to have Brian Kemp running for Senate, and Kemp they've got a very big post-grad and grad electorate, soft Republican electorate in Cobb, Gwinnett, Fulton, DeKalb counties. And I think that is what dents the margins in Atlanta. You know, the latest populists that have run statewide in Georgia have struggled. And of course, a lot of this is owed to the election laws in Georgia, the proliferation of absentee ballots. But Kemp would probably win that seat. And I think that he's probably going to go in there and rattle the most cages to try to win it. Now, I think he'll also get plenty of primary challengers. But as far as Michigan and Minnesota go, I think they're smelling a major working class realignment in those states. I think that also it may be stuff coming out of the Doge investigations into where this dark money comes from, because both of those are up to their eyeballs in corruption, both of those states. And Peters resigning and Gretchen Whitmer having no interest in the Senate race in 2026. I don't know if it's as much electoral math as it is Whitmer is almost certainly going to run for president in 2028, and therefore doesn't want to win a seat in 26 and come out for president the next year.
Interesting. Seth, congratulations on nailing it. I always appreciated your insight during election season, and I know the viewers loved it. And that's why I think that you're absolutely right. It's the season continues. The reality is that if President Trump wants to get this agenda through, not only does he need a Republican Congress, but he needs to stop what will become impeachment part 2. So thank you for joining us as always. When you're ready to unveil the 435 House analysis of updates in the Senate, you are always welcome back. I love the analysis. I love what you've done to put it all out there. It's so great. So thanks for being with us again.
Well, thank you for having me back on, and to your audience, thank you for contributing to a great show. You guys can keep up with me, skeshel.substack.com, and I look forward to seeing you in the future.
All right. Thanks, Seth. All right, guys, what a great conversation. And trust me, you're not going to hear that anywhere else. You're not going to hear the breakdown because pundits don't get this. They're not based in data. You can see a quick flash in the pan poll, but with Seth, you saw it. Unbelievable discussion there. Tomorrow, a great panel coming your way to break down everything that's happened. I always love the Thursday panel. I hope you do too. And then on Friday, Governor Rod Blagojevich of Illinois. You remember him? He was sent to jail, starred on The Celebrity Apprentice, then was commuted his sentence during the first Trump term, and then President Trump, like a week ago, pardoned him. An unbelievable personal story about a Democrat who has endorsed President Trump and loves the guy. He's going to tell us the whole thing in a way that he's never said before. So make sure that you tune in Friday, hit that subscribe and notification button now. Remember, my newsletter comes out twice a week. I wrote a great piece on the AP and why President Trump is banning it. He talked about it yesterday in the White House. So go to SeanSpicer.com, sign up for free. Paid VIP sponsors are always welcome. We'll see you back here tomorrow on the Sean Spicer Show. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.